After a few hours, Cyan signed up to fight in the ring. The crowd went wild and everyone started shouting, as they couldn't believe that the cage was doing this, and they came to the conclusion that there was a lack of participants. One of the men clenched his fist tightly and with an angry look said this was ridiculous, thinking it was some kind of joke. Cyan entered the ring, and with a calm expression began wrapping his hands. Everyone was furious seeing that the cage had allowed a kid to be a participant. Taram was excited because she didn't know there would be an event like this. At that moment, Cyan turned his head to one side and looked somewhat surprised. Zelbard, the giant opponent of Cyan, appeared and entered the ring. He began to stare at Cyan and with a smile started asking for a way to kill Cyan, mocking him by calling him little kid. Cyan put his hands on his hips, started looking at Zelbard and remained silent, without taking a single step back. Despite Zelbard being a giant, he was not afraid. A man with gray hair who was among the crowd crossed his arms and thought that the hosts had lost their minds since this was going to be too uneven to be called a fight. The man next to him began smiling like a madman, asking if this wasn't better. The other man looked at him with a confused look and explained that Zelbard was a monster known as half-ogre. Zelbard decided how to kill Cyan. He began to laugh, started pointing at him with his finger and decided to kill him by crushing him. Just before Zelbard could finish the sentence, Cyan jumped and stomped hard on his finger. Upon feeling this, Zelbard's gaze filled with surprise. He didn't know what was happening. Once he turned his head to the side, he saw Cyan approaching him at great speed. Cyan extended one hand towards him, clenched the fist of the other tightly and with a piercing look prepared to give him a strong punch. Just before Zelbard had time to react, Cyan moved at great speed, approached him and gave him a strong punch in the nose, crushing him like he was a mere ant. Not long after, while Cyan was still in the air, Zelbard lifted his head and fell to his knees on the ground. His face hit the ground hard, and foam began to come out of his mouth, indicating that he had lost his life. Seeing this, all the men who were previously doubting and mocking Cyan's strength were now left speechless upon witnessing such power. They couldn't believe that a simple kid was so strong. Once Zelbard's body fell to the ground, Cyan also landed and with a calm look began to gaze off to one side. Even the combat commentator was shocked and announced that Lemia's Simon was the winner. Everyone started cheering for Cyan, and he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Karam asked why the commentator had just called Cyan Lemia's Simon. With a serene expression, he explained that he couldn't go around revealing who he really was, reminding her that he was the son of a duke. Karam manifested, and with a serious look asked what the point was if his face was uncovered. With an indifferent look, Cyan recalled that in fact, he had an active spell for that purpose, so there wasn't anything to worry about. Karam began to imagine her father smiling. According to her, he was an idiot. She clenched her teeth and couldn't help but get angry and came to the conclusion that her father had shared his authority again. Now in reality, Cyan wore a mask, and his face was pixelated. People could know who Cyan really was if they got to know him and interacted with him. But if they tried to remember his face, then they simply wouldn't remember anything. Karam disappeared and she decided to go to sleep. Cyan, who had one hand in his pocket, started touching his shoulder with the other hand. He began observing the trail of energy she had left in the air, and his eyes filled with confusion as he recalled that it wasn't typical of her to worry about him, to which she responded that she wasn't. The body of the giant Zelbard was lying in the ring, and the crowd was cheering for Cyan. Among the audience, there was a man with white hair. Our boy had caught this guy's attention. He was none other than Gunther. His eyes filled with excitement, and with a smile, he chose Cyan as his opponent and asked him not to disappoint him. A few hours later, night fell, and the streets were covered in fog. Several customers entered the cage, and at reception stood Lisa. She crossed her arms and asked seriously what they wanted. In front of her stood a blonde woman named Delia, the manager of the red light district. While holding a whip in one hand, she began pointing at Lisa with the other hand. With a calm expression on her face, she decided to get straight to business since she didn't want to stay here long. She remembered that a small boy had caused a lot of commotion and began to get angry, and with a look full of rage, she revealed that she knew he was here, so she gave the order to Lisa to bring him to her right now. Lisa did not lose her composure and with a calm look responded that she didn't know what she was talking about and asked her to get out of here, asking what the hell she thought she was doing. Behind Delia were several men, some carried weapons while others were unarmed. They all adopted an offensive stance. She put her hands on her hips and despite being somewhat furious, started showing a smile and asked Lisa to stay out of this since the issue had occurred in her territory. Lisa, who had her hands behind her back, unsheathed the small daggers and decided not to tolerate any more of this, since it had to do with their clients. Delia got angry, clenched her fist, extended her hand to one side and started shouting, assuming that he was here. Upon hearing this, one of the men drew his dagger and asked her to give them the order to finish her off. Seeing this, Lisa thought that this was not good and her eyes filled with concern. She realized that Cyan had really done it. She didn't know what to do now. At that moment, Cyan appeared, raised his hand up and with a calm look caught everyone's attention by asking if they were looking for him. Upon hearing his voice, the men turned around and couldn't help but go into shock as they didn't know how he had entered here. Lisa, who was ready to act, was left speechless upon seeing Cyan and with a confused look asked how long he had been here for. Cyan began to walk and responded that he had appeared since she had said that this problem had occurred in her territory. He approached Delia, started looking into her eyes, and with a calm expression asked her to speak with him instead of bothering Lisa. Upon feeling Cyan's gaze, Delia couldn't help but be somewhat surprised, but then upon seeing how handsome he was, her eyes filled with love. With a serene look, Cyan extended his hand towards her to shake hands and apologized to her in case he had displeased her. In her eyes, Cyan was a very beautiful boy. Cyan explained that Jason had been the one who provoked him first, just before he could finish speaking. Delia took his hand with both of hers and said it was okay. She brought her head closer to his hand, started looking at him with a loving gaze, and while blushing asked what his name was. Cyan, who was somewhat confused, responded that his name was Simon. Lisa, who was behind them, couldn't help but feel somewhat shocked. She began to caress Cyan's hand with her cheek, closed her eyes, and with a smile thought that he had a very brave name for such a delicate face. Lisa remembered that Cyan was a minor. She panicked and with a worried look thought this woman was dangerous. She told Cyan that he didn't have to talk to her and advised him to come this way. While Delia was caressing Cyan's hand with her cheek, Cyan turned towards Lisa. He started shaking his hand and with a calm look asked her not to worry as he would take care of it. Lisa panicked and revealed that Delia was a dangerous woman. Delia took Cyan's hand with one hand, and using the other, she pulled out a red card from her chest and explained that this was her business card. She wanted to have a much deeper conversation with our boy next time. Cyan took the card, and upon looking closely, he saw that this card was from Delia's pleasure room, where she catered to the tastes of those who had the honor of receiving this card. Delia's men began to leave through the door, and with an affectionate smile, she started saying goodbye to Cyan and asked him not to forget to stop by. Cyan couldn't help but panic as his eyes filled with fear when he realized that this woman was crazy. She placed one hand on top of the doorframe, turned back around, looked at Cyan lovingly with a smile on her face, and explained that she could serve him for free. Her words even made one of the men blush. After saying this, she said goodbye to Cyan, and both he and Lisa were left stunned. Lisa placed her elbow on the table, rested her face in her hand, sighed, and asked if he had listened to her before. Cyan began pointing towards the door with his finger and with a confused look responded that they had been the ones who provoked him first. She started looking at Cyan and explained that she had heard that even he had participated in a match and won. Cyan was somewhat confused to see how quickly the news had spread, to which she replied that this was a very small place. Cyan began climbing the stairs, and Lisa advised him not to approach the room of pleasures. Cyan started getting angry and responded that he didn't usually visit places like that. Lisa, who still had her face resting on her hand, began observing him closely and couldn't help but think he looked very cute seeing how embarrassed he was. At that moment, a mysterious woman who had her back against the wall and her arms crossed appeared, and upon seeing that Delia had left on her own accord, she thought this was good. Upon hearing her voice, Lisa was somewhat surprised and fixed her gaze on the woman. Looking to one side, she saw that this woman was Linz Nihaloff, the Lambaster Cage's owner. While her eyes were shining, she began to look at Lisa and with a smile realized that she had gotten quite close to Cyan. Lisa stood up, placed her hands on her waist, bowed her head before her and explained that she was only treating Cyan like any other VIP client. Linz, who still had her arms crossed, revealed that Lisa had even given some advice to Cyan. Lisa didn't even lift her head, and with a sincere look explained that the reason wasn't due to any personal feelings since Cyan was still just a child after all. At that moment, a man with white hair appeared, and upon hearing this, he couldn't help but smile and revealed that Lisa was underestimating Cyan. Upon hearing his voice, Lisa's eyes filled with alertness. She turned around and couldn't help but wonder how he had dared to set foot here. He was Gunther Lictus. He opened the door, entered inside, started waving at her with his hand, and with a smile asked her why she didn't remodel this place a bit since it had become old. Linz, who had her back against the wall, raised a hand and with a smile revealed that she was the one who had called Gunther here. Upon hearing this, Lisa turned towards her and with a confused look asked why. Linz placed her hand under her cheek, and her eyes filled with excitement because she wanted Lisa to organize a fight for Gunther. Lisa panicked, and her eyes filled with surprise as she remembered that Gunther had been expelled long ago. She asked who his opponent would be. Gunther approached her, started pointing at himself with his thumb, and with an excited look revealed that he wanted to fight Lemia's Simon. He started staring at her and asked what her opinion was about this, and if she could smell the scent of money. At the same time, somewhere else in the city, someone began screaming like a madman. Two men who were next to the room started looking toward the door and thought that she was very noisy today. The man with blue hair began to look at the other man, and with a calm expression explained that before leaving, she had said that she would be the one doing the seduction. The other man closed his eyes and started laughing, thinking that she was completely crazy for that kid. With a serious look, the blue-haired man explained that he was sure she would do anything to get him to come here. The other man opened his eyes, put his hand under his chin, and with a smile agreed since she always got what she wanted. The woman started laughing like crazy, and both men felt sorry for him and were glad they had ordinary faces. In the room, the woman wrinkled another paper and threw it on the floor. She was in her bed, and there was a pile of portraits of men on top of it. According to her, this was very strange since she could not remember it. On top of the bed, there were several portraits of various handsome men. She was sure she had seen him, but still, she couldn't remember it. She was none other than Delia. She put her hands on her head, lost her composure and began to cry, and her eyes filled with despair because she couldn't remember Cyan's beautiful face. Tears started to form in her eyes, and the despair grew. She could remember Cyan but not his face. It was as if her brain were clouded. Cyan's face was all blurry. Several seconds later, she stopped crying as she began to feel aroused. She started touching her face with her hands, stuck out her tongue and love filled her eyes. She wanted Cyan even more desperately. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.